Hello and welcome to Training Bytes. My name is Mike Gibb from accountsrecovery.net, and with me again is Mary Shores from Mary Shores Communications, who is here to offer great insight and advice into the world of training. Mary Shores is a second-generation agency owner, best-selling author, and creator of the Collection Advantage online program, which is designed to help collectors create and execute high-converting scripts that increase your cash flow and decrease complaints. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is the art of asking questions. So, Mary, how would you like to start today's conversation?
How about starting today's conversation with a buzzword that I am continuing and more hearing in the industry, and that is the big empathy. How's that sound?
That sounds great. I love empathy.
Do you really?
I do. I've always tried, empathy has always been something as a journalist that, that I've used as a tool to connect with people. So I think it's a great tool.
And do you agree with me that you're seeing like a more of a push towards empathy in the industry?
Absolutely. I think it's definitely within the context of people dealing with coronavirus and the pandemic. Empathy has been probably the most oft-used word in the collection industry these past few months. And I think that will continue even after this is all over.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that because, the way that I kind of see this is the first thing about empathy is understanding that there's a way to leverage the power of empathy. And as a journalist, you know that. And one of the things that I'm often feeling is it's not enough to tell collectors to be empathetic. We actually need to show them how to do that. And I'm not sure about you, Mike, but one of the things that I've noticed is a way to get a vulnerable consumer to open up the conversation is to start asking those questions. And in the Collection Advantage program, we call these calibrated questions. So the one that I want to start with and how to really use empathy to open up the conversation in a way that's going to increase getting the payment, because I think that the fear can be on the collector side of things or on the collection manager side of things is if we are too empathetic, does that affect our ability to get the payment? And the answer to that question is actually using empathy will increase the payments, not decrease them. So the way we start to do this is by asking feeling questions. So an example is asking the consumer, how do you feel about your finances over the next few weeks? And then pause and let them answer.
So then how do you know how to respond once they say how they feel?
That's a great question, Mike, because, we might be concerned that if we ask a question like that, we could be opening up a can of worms. But the truth is that it's going to open up the conversation. And I'm going to tell you now how to listen to the consumer and drill down into whether their response is something that is filled with certainty or uncertainty, because knowing this will determine the direction of the call. So let's first start with a certainty response. So you ask the consumer, how are you feeling about your finances over the next few weeks? And the consumer says, I'm feeling okay because even with everything going on, I was able to secure my unemployment. Or maybe they say, I'm feeling pretty good because my employer was very dedicated to making sure that I could work from home. Or they say something along the lines of, my job feels really secure right now. Okay, so we all have a basic human need for security and having our, financial standing in order. So that's what a certainty response looks like. Now let's talk about the flip side. So the other kind of response is an uncertainty response. This looks like you've asked the consumer, how are you feeling about your finances over the next few weeks? And they say something like, I'm really worried because I've applied for unemployment. I haven't heard anything. I don't know what's happening with my company. They've had to shut down. I don't have daycare. They could say any number of things, but what you as a collector are tuning into is, do they have certainty about their finances or uncertainty?
So it's not necessarily a positive or negative, like I can make my payment or I can't make my payment. In this case, both of those would be certainty statements. It's about more like active listening and sort of reading between the lines of what they're saying.
Hmm, that's a great question. So what I think is it's about opening up how they feel about it, because it's kind of an interesting conversation to have. But what I have found in the collection industry, that a lot of the strategies are built on a baby boomer mindset. And what I mean by that is that boomers tend to make decisions based on pride and responsibility. And really, we're moving into more of a millennial generation where they're going to make decisions based on how we've made them feel. And so by asking that question, how do you feel about your finances over the next few weeks, we're inviting them to talk about their feelings. And as we get into these younger generations, which, by the way, all of us know by now that millennials, they can have grandchildren. So a large population of our consumers are in fact millennials. When, people remember the way you make them feel, and that's the important thing. So once we've determined how they feel about it, it sets us up perfectly to validate that consumer.
So how do you respond? Well, what's the next step after you say, how do you feel about your finances? And the person on the other end of the phone says, they're terrible. I don't have any money. I've lost my job. My truck stopped working. Like everything you joke about, you hear like the country music songs. How do you respond then? Like, how do you take that conversation back toward where it needs to go?
And this is the magic right here, Mike. So, because consumers often will respond with, their dog died, their grandma's sick, all of those things. And the way you respond to that question or that comment from the consumer is the most important thing. What I really believe is a super powerful way to respond is to say, I understand how you feel. Many people are feeling the same way, so you are not alone. You are not alone is the number one high converting phrase in online marketing. And in the collection industry, what I have seen is it works really, really well to validate the consumer. Because remember from one of our previous videos that when the consumer feels heard and understood, they can check the box in their mind that that it's now time we can move the call forward.
Excellent. Well, before we let our viewers go for this episode, is there anything else you want to add? Any other key points while we're on this topic of the art of asking questions?
Sure. The other thing that I want to add is that if the consumer responds with that certainty, we still want to validate what they've said by saying something like, I'm so happy for you, or I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that with me. We still want to validate what the consumer has said, even if they responded with something that lets you know that they're okay. So thank you for that question. That's great.
Well, thank you. And you are not alone might be a common phrase, but you are alone in being an expert in this. So thank you very much for joining us again, and thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.